Hey, what's up, guys? It's Mark again. I'm going to be talking about fantasy football. So for this video, what I'm going to do is talk about the NFC South, preview that division, and then I'm going to go over some things beforehand about some of the news and stuff that's been going on in the league and some questions. So let's get to it. I have a question from Nathan. He's a big fan of the show. He's commented a lot and given me a lot of good advice. So he had a pretty good question about the Cleveland Browns and whether or not I think they will win the division. So in my opinion, I think the Browns have enough talent to win the AFC North, but I don't think they have the discipline to win that division yet, if that makes sense. So, for instance, like Baker Mayfield is still a second-year quarterback. He kind of brings a lot of unnecessary attention to himself. They just added Odell, who's kind of a brat, to be honest. And they have a lot of young players on defense. So can this team handle the hype? I think they are definitely going to be competitive for the division, but my feeling is that the Pittsburgh Steelers still own that division. Yes, they lost Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, but they are so good at player development. They are so good at finding guys to fill in those holes. And if you go back to the AFC North video that I talked about, I still think that they're going to have a very good fantasy production from their players, and I think they're still going to win the division. So where will Cleveland finish? So right now in the AFC, I'm taking I think the Chargers are going to have the number 1 seed. They're the most complete team. The 2 and 3 seed is kind of a toss-up to me between New England and Indianapolis. I think those are going to be the next 2 teams. And then I think there's going to be a pretty significant record drop-off to the number 4 seed, which is going to be the AFC North winner. 5 seed is pretty much locked down by the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs and Chargers will either be 1 or 5. And then the 6th seed, I see a compilation of like the Browns, the Texans, the Jaguars, maybe the Ravens again, but I see them regressing a little bit. Like, those are all teams I see competing for the 6th seed. So to me, I honestly feel that I would be more surprised if Cleveland gets a first-round bye than if they don't make the playoffs at all. So that's just my take. But I think they could win the division, but I'm still right now taking the Steelers to win the AFC North next season. So some news around the league. There's some big news in Kansas City. It was announced by the NFL that Tyreek Hill will not be suspended, so he is right now good to go to play the whole season. So where does that now affect their players? I still think that Tyreek Hill, I like him as right now he's my number 6 receiver. I still have him behind guys like Hopkins, Adams, Juju, Michael Thomas, and Julio Jones. And I understand that Tyreek Hill was the number 1 player in standard last year. But I personally would prefer a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who you're going to get at least 20 points from game to game, and it's going to be consistent, than somebody like Tyreek Hill, who you might get 40 points, but then you also run the risk of getting 5 points. So fantasy football is really all dependent on your matchups with people and what type of good games your opponent has versus you, and that'll determine your record. So I prefer guys that are more consistent, but I do think Tyreek Hill is going to be very good, and he's a great snag early second round if he's available. But it's going to be interesting to see where he goes now that the suspension is apparently not going to happen for him. Some other news in New England. It was announced that Sony Michel is now on the physically unable to perform list to start training camp because he's dealing with recovery from knee surgery. And this pretty much explains why I do not draft Patriots running backs, is because, there's a lot of hype with Sony Michel, but he's not going to be ready to start training camp. They just drafted another running back, Damian Williams, on their team. Or, excuse me, not Damian Williams, Damian Harris. And then they also got all the PPR guys they use, Rex Burkhead and James White. So I really just don't even buy the Sony Michel hype anyway. And personally, I would just not draft him at all, especially in the wake of this news. Demaryius Thomas is also on that list for them, but like I said, I don't think he's gonna. You think he's basically his career's done at this point. Wouldn't be surprised if he gets cut. All right, so NFC South. So this is a very explosive division, and a lot of great fantasy production comes out of it. So let's start at the top. We're gonna start with the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta Falcons. So just as my personal view, I think that this is going to be a bounce back team. Didn't have a good season last year, a lot of bad injury luck, but I think this is a team that could surprise and make the playoffs next year. They got a new coaching regime. They finally got rid of Sarkisian, who was terrible. Now their offensive coordinator is Dirk Cutter, former Buccaneers coach. This guy loves to bomb the ball out downfield, and Matt Ryan is the perfect quarterback for that. So what's their schedule like? They're at Minnesota first game, then they host the Eagles at the Colts. So those are some tough matchups, but then things get nice down the stretch. They got the Titans at home, the Texans on the road, and then at the road against Arizona, and then versus the Rams. That's a little more tough, but their midseason stretch is very nice, especially towards the back end. And then at the end towards the fantasy playoffs, they host Carolina at San Francisco and versus Jacksonville. So potentially some good matchups, especially depending on how Jacksonville's looking by the end of the season. So this is going to be a back-ended team where their value is going to increase as the season goes on. And let's start with Matt Ryan. So Matt Ryan was very good last year, number 2 quarterback in fantasy football. And, I think Matt Ryan is a good quarterback. Like, I personally don't prefer him because he's somebody that usually the Aaron Rodgers hype of Aaron Rodgers getting drafted really high will cause people to panic and then cause people to reach for Matt Ryan. And he usually goes higher than he's deserved to go, but he is a very consistent quarterback. I think he will easily be top 5 again, but he doesn't really give you much of a running as a running quarterback either, so that's why I don't prefer him. But if he comes to you at the point at which he's available on the board, it's not a bad take. But again, try to shore up on running back and receivers before you take somebody at the quarterback position. The running back, Devonta Freeman, comes back. He was injured for most of last year and he didn't play well. So a lot of people aren't as high on him anymore. But let's look at some of his numbers from the past that are very good. So in 2017, he was the number 13 running back. So pretty good. But then in 2016, which was the year Atlanta eventually went to the Super Bowl, the number 6 running back in PPR. And in that season, he had 54 receptions. So this guy is giving you a ton of points from a PPR perspective. And, even better is that Tevin Coleman is now in San Francisco. And behind him, he's got Ito Smith, who was basically useless last year, given the opportunity. And then they drafted a guy named Quadri Olsen, who is interesting. Maybe use him as a flyer if you're in deep leagues. But I like Devonta Freeman as a potential bounce back. But the health is a concern for me, so I personally think he should go somewhere around the number 15 running back, and he shouldn't be reached for in drafts. But as a 3rd or 4th round pick, this is a very solid take for you. He could surprise a lot of people and get back to his old form. Wide receivers. So Julio Jones, going to be a great wide receiver again next year. So keep in mind, this guy was the number 4 wide receiver in fantasy football last season. But he didn't have a touchdown catch until literally halfway through the season, which that is not going to happen this year because now he doesn't have Sarkisian as his offensive coordinator. This guy is going to get the ball. I really like him. I personally think he's going to be my number 4 favorite receiver next season. It's pretty close to him and Juju, but so much value in Julio Jones. You got to consider him, especially over some of these running backs that could get reached for, like Devonta Freeman. Not that anybody would take him over Julio, but just guys like that, like take Julio Jones over a running back you're reaching for. David Johnson is a good example of that. I'd rather have Julio Jones than David Johnson. Calvin Ridley, second-year receiver. This guy was up and down last year. He had some huge games at the beginning of the season. Everybody bought into his hype, and then he kind of fell off a little bit. But I do like him as a breakout. He's pretty clearly the number 2 receiver. And he was a top 20 receiver even despite of his inconsistencies last year. So I like him to bounce to top 15 just because of all the volume this offense is going to get. And good value for you. Probably might slip in the draft and could be a good player. Mohamed Sanu is good as a PPR player, but he's getting a little older, so kind of keep an eye out on that for him. Justin Hardy is another receiver they have. He's a good flyer. He's kind of a deep threat guy that could be used, but I mean, he's not really somebody that I would take particularly high. and they drafted a guy named, I believe first name is Marcus Green, his last name, but not 100% sure. He's a guy they drafted. He's another rookie that's got potential. Maybe he can kind of step into the scene as well. Kind of more of a PPR kind of slot guy like Svu. All right, so tight end, Austin Hooper. So don't let the stats deceive you for the overall season, because this guy was the number 6 tight end last year. But the numbers significantly dropped between him and the number 5 player, Jared Cook, who I'll talk about later. And Austin Hooper played every game last season, and for the most part did not give you anything. There's so much potential in his offense, but he just does not stand out, and he's pretty much already shown that he's not going to be a top target on this team. So I would avoid him. There's so many other guys with upside, but especially ones I'm going to be talking about later in this division. So I would not draft Austin Hooper. And then, so another stats deceiving stat here. Sorry, that wasn't very well worded. But this defense last year was ranked 28th. But you have to consider that they basically went through a whole litany of injuries at the beginning of the season and just never were able to recover. But they've got a very talented defense. I like them more as a streamer that you can kind of put in later in the season, especially like they're starting off with some pretty good offensive teams like Minnesota, Philadelphia, Indianapolis. So don't draft him, but this is a team that I think the defense could surprise people. They could be a good waiver wire pickup as the season goes along. And then their kicker, Gregorio Tavecchio, he came in like mid-season after Matt Bryant got injured, and he was actually very good. He played very well for them last year down the stretch. He could be a very good kicker, especially in a potent offense like this. So, all right, so that's the Atlanta Falcons. I really hope I didn't call them the Atlanta Hawks. I feel like I did. I'm sorry if I said that, but anyway. So the next team I'm going to talk about is the Carolina Panthers. So this was a tale of two seasons. They started off, I think, like 6-2 or 7-2, and then they finished the season 7-9. So just absolute polar opposites. But a lot of that was because Cam Newton wasn't healthy. So let's look at this schedule for them. They had a tough first game against the LA Rams, but then a lot of very good matchups for them. They got they host Tampa Bay, at Arizona. Those are excellent matchups. Then at the Texans, that's iffy. Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, and then San Francisco. So some good matchups there that you can take advantage of. And then down the stretch, they got at the Falcons versus the Seahawks, and then at Indianapolis. So fair, not great, but not too tough either. So their quarterback is Cam Newton. Cam Newton, he wasn't great last year, but he also wasn't 100% healthy at times. I like him as a fantasy quarterback because of his rushing value, and I think especially now that there's some other guys that are kind of his skill set that have gotten a little more hype recently, like running quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield. Like Newton is going to drop a little bit in this draft compared to where he was a few years ago, and he could give you a lot of value as a bounce back candidate. So I like him, somebody you can take at the end of the draft, fill up your positions. So like Matt Ryan, for example, personally, fill up on running back and receivers and get those flex positions squared away. And then as the season goes on, you get Cam Newton at the later part of the draft, and you'll have good flex players you could put in. I would rather go that route than take Matt Ryan high as just an example. Running backs. So Christian McCaffrey is their running back. I love Christian McCaffrey for next year. Tied for number one running back with Saquon. I almost would take him as my number one overall pick. It's very close. I'd go back and forth between him and Saquon. I think in PPR I would consider McCaffrey as a number one overall pick potentially. But for standard, I think you have to take Saquon in that position. Really, he's going to be the whole focus of this offense because nobody else has really stepped up from a running back or wide receiver position, and some of the other guys are getting older or just overhyped in general. Good hand. So, and then his backup is a guy named Jordan Scarlett, I believe, is his first name, but Scarlett. And this is a guy that you draft as handcuffed because of the potential, but you just have to understand that Christian McCaffrey has a unique skill set that is not going to be replicated by his handcuff. So you can't expect him to just replicate all that success because he's just right now he's one of the top running backs in the league, and he's just like a receiver molded into a running back, basically. It's kind of crazy. So wide receiving core, and these guys are just kind of all over the place. DJ Moore is their number one guy going into next season, and he was good at times last year, but really with all the opportunity that he had, he really didn't step up much. I like him as a potential breakout candidate because I think now that Cam Newton is healthy and this team is obviously talented enough to be competitive for the playoffs. I think DJ Moore could have a good season. I don't think he's going to be a top 20 guy or anything like that, but for somebody who could fall like this be very good value for you mid-round, I would personally take him, and I think that would be a very good draft position. It help your team out a lot. So yeah, DJ Moore, a good guy to look at. Curtis Samuel, no. I mean, this guy has been around longer, should have taken advantage of the opportunity to be a number one receiver, but hasn't. So I personally think you should stay away from him. Chris Hogan is the guy they just got from the Patriots, and so the common trend with Patriots receivers is that they generally only succeed in that offense, and then they go elsewhere in the league because teams are stupid and pay them a contract, and then they just don't perform. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen with Chris Hogan. I think he's going to fall off the cliff. Don't take him because, frankly, he wasn't even that good last season. And then some other guys that got they drafted a guy named Godwin. I honestly don't know if he's related to Chris Godwin in Tampa Bay, but I mean he's a rookie that maybe he can get opportunity. And then just don't even consider Torrey Smith because this guy is just like a walking ghost at this point. His career's over. He's not going to do anything. And Jarris Wright is another one of those in this team. Speaking of walking ghosts, let's talk about Greg Olsen. Okay, this guy is going to get drafted because he's one of Cam's favorite targets. And yes, I think Greg Olsen will have his games at times, but this guy has been so injury prone the last few seasons. I personally do not think you should take him at all, to be honest, because he's probably going to get hurt again. And there's so many other more tight ends with upside. I just personally would stay away from Greg Olsen at all, even though when he is healthy, he's probably going to have some good games, but he's probably only going to be healthy for 4 games and then break a foot because that has happened the last 3 seasons, it seems like. Anyway, the defense is okay. But personally, another example where you just stream and just don't draft. I mean, that's a trend in this division in general because these offenses are so good and they play each other twice a year that these are not very reliable defenses. But coincidentally, when they play Tampa Bay and they're facing Jameis Winston, who will throw a lot of interceptions, they'll have great games. But that's the exception. It's not the norm. So just in general, don't draft these defenses. And then another guy that should not be drafted at all is Graham Gano. I mean, this guy he really wasn't even that. He didn't even have accuracy problems last year. He just didn't even kick the ball really. So there's so many other kickers out there that have more opportunity than him, and he's really not that accurate in general anyway. Even though last year he was all right. All right. So next team, New Orleans Saints. Very explosive team. Going to be a Super Bowl contender again this year. So let's look at their schedule. They start off first game on Monday night versus the Houston Texans. Then they go to the Los Angeles Rams, to Seattle. Those are tough games. Then versus Dallas, versus Tampa Bay, at Jacksonville, and at Chicago. And then I'm just telling you, this team's middle stretch gets incredible. They're facing a lot, most of the divisional opponents then. And then at the end of the season, they have San Francisco, Indianapolis, and Tennessee, which, depending on what you think about Tennessee's defense for next year, this is a pretty good fantasy schedule in the playoffs. So, kind of like Atlanta, a team that could have a good second half. Drew Brees is their quarterback. Drew Brees was the number 7 quarterback last year, but I'm just saying that he is not always the most consistently relied upon quarterback, so I personally would try to steer clear of him. And that is tough to say because he is one of the best of all time. But they have Kamara as a great running back option for them. Their defense is solid at times. There's going to be some games where he's going to light up the scoreboard, but there's going to be other games where he's not as good. So, just understand that with him. I would rather have another guy personally, but not a bad quarterback to take. And then I'm going to highlight his backup, Teddy Bridgewater, because if anything were to happen to Drew Brees, or if any team in the NFL trades for Teddy Bridgewater is on a 1-year deal right now, this guy could instantly become a stream-worthy quarterback. Yes, he still has a lot to prove, but there's a lot of upside there. So keep an eye out on him as the season goes along. Running back. So Alvin Kamara, this guy is a PPR monster. This offense is set up perfectly around him. Now Mark Ingram is not there, so this guy could potentially explode. I think I like him as my number 4 running back for next year, maybe number 3 in PPR. But the elite running back and the top of the draft, you're the number 3 pick in the draft, I would consider taking him depending on how the top other picks go. So Mark Ingram is gone. They replaced him with Latavius Murray. I really do not like that fit at all for this team. I think Latavius Murray will have some games that are good here and there, but he's not a particularly athletic running back. The guy that I actually really like is Buck Allen. Javorius is his actual name. So this guy was very good as a PPR player in Baltimore, and now he's moving to a very pass-heavy to the running back options. And if anything happens to Kamara, this guy is going to get a ton of points, and he's probably not even going to get drafted because a lot of people are forgetting about him. And, potentially a great fit on this team. I really like Buck Allen as somebody at the end of the draft, or, very deep leagues, good flyer option to take for you depending on what your running back situation's like. They have good receivers on this team. Michael Thomas is elite. I like him as my number 5 receiver for next year because he's so good. He's going to get the ball a lot from Drew Brees. And then you look at the rest of the receiving core, and there's a lot of questions. So Ted Ginn is their number 2 wide receiver, but he is 34, and I really don't see him holding up because he dealt with injuries a lot last year. Cameron Meredith has got potential, but he's also battled injuries too. The guy I like as a potential breakout candidate is Traquan Smith. He's only 23, and he had some very good games last year, but developing consistency is going to be a big thing for him. And then they also got some other good options on the team that this offense has so much void that could be filled at that number 2 wide receiver position. So this is pay attention to this receiving battles in the preseason because this could really give you a lot of value late in the draft, depending on which one of these guys step up. They've also got Keith Kirkwood, Austin Carr, and some other candidates. Pay attention to this because there's a lot of good value to be had potentially. Another target I really like they just got is Jared Cook, tight end, formerly from the Raiders. He was number 5 tight end last year with that team, and he's moving to a better offense now. I like him as a top 5 tight end again next year. Very good value, and I think he's going to be a good red zone target for them. Saints defense, very good last year. Actually, I don't know. Well, they were number 8 defense last year, but they had some up and down games. Like I said, they're going to have tough matchups at times, but potentially a good defense at the last round of the draft. And then their kicker, Will Lutz. I really like Will Lutz. He's probably one of the top 4 kickers I like. He's somebody I would justify taking in the second to last round because of all the opportunity and very accurate kicker with a good leg. So that's the New Orleans Saints. Last team in this division is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this team is got a lot to prove. New coaching regime. They've got Bruce Arians now. What's the future going to look like for Jameis Winston? A lot of questions. So their schedule. They got a good first fantasy game against San Francisco, then at Carolina, and then versus the Giants. So Great potential in the first 3 games. At the Rams then, and then at the Saints, and then versus Carolina. So some up and down games. And then at the end of the season, they've got the Colts, at the Lions, and then versus the Texans. So could be good there too. But Jameis Winston, so he's their quarterback, and Jameis Winston is another one of those that, like, he'll have very good games at times, but there'll be some games where he'll have 4 interceptions or something crazy. He's very inconsistent, and I personally do not like this guy unless you're going to go with a streaming quarterback plan. Don't draft him. I mean, but just pay attention to the matchups because there'll be some good ones available for him. Running back. So running backs is a mess on this team, but there is a lot of potential to be had. Peyton Barber, stay away from him. He had all the opportunity in the world last year, and he just did nothing with it. So I don't like him at all. I think the guy that you should watch out for, and this is a guy that struggled a lot last year, is Ronald Jones, because Ronald Jones, did not look good last year, but very talented at USC, and he's definitely a good prospect. Had a lot of hype at the time. So don't sleep on him. Give him a chance. And, if you got some extra running back, if you already got your running back positions in check, like, this is a perfect opportunity for a guy who obviously has talent. And if he becomes the number 1 back on this team, like, this could be great value for you down the stretch. And, really could be, especially with these defenses in this division, like, could really give you a lot of value depending on how he does this season. So keep an eye on Ronald Jones as a flyer that you can stash on your bench. Another guy to keep an eye out on that I potentially like is Andre Ellington. His brother is Bruce. But Andre Ellington, he's trying out for a roster spot right now, but a 30-year-old guy, but very productive in the past with the Cardinals under Bruce Arians. And I like him as a potential guy that could fill in PPR formats and give you some good points down the stretch. So keep an eye out on him. He could be a very good value to you as a PPR player that is likely not going to get drafted. All right, wide receivers. So Mike Evans, I like this guy, and now that Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries are gone, he's going to get a lot more opportunity still. I like him as a top 10 receiver. I don't know what he's not always very consistent because he's got Jameis Winston as his quarterback, but this guy is talented, and now he's pretty clearly the number 1 option on this team on offense. So I like Mike Evans. Good pick in the 2nd round. And then another guy I think could potentially step up is Chris Godwin. And I don't think that Chris Godwin is going to explode necessarily, but potential top 20 receiver who, now that he's been very productive for them, even with Deshaun Jackson and Humphries there, but now that they're both gone, he's got a lot of opportunity to step up and really be a good receiver for next year. Then they've got some other guys like Rashad Perryman, who kind of older. Justin Watson, a guy who's been around, hasn't really had an opportunity yet. And then Scott Miller, a receiver they drafted in the late rounds. Yeah, and I don't really always trust late round receiver picks, but this is a good, because this team is going to be throwing a lot because they're probably going to be losing a lot. And I think Scott Miller could be a guy who could give you a lot of sneaky value in those garbage time situations, and could be a good pickup late in the draft for you. All right, this is my favorite tight end for next year, and this is why. O.J. Howard. So, okay, you're not. It's gonna take a pretty hefty price in the draft to get guys like Travis Kelce and Zach Ertz because they're gonna go very high. But O.J. Howard did not go very high last year because he was dealing with injuries. He was only the number 15 tight end, but you have to consider with him that there were some games last year where he was excellent. He had 2 touchdowns, and now they've lost some targets. I think that O.J. Howard, with just the physical specimen that he is, and then the opportunity, he could really explode next year, and I'd like him as a top 5 tight end that you get in the middle rounds of the draft. So, big O.J. Howard fan. I think you should definitely take advantage of him there. And then Cameron Braid is the guy that's been around and has been productive at times for them. only take Cameron Brate if you're in very deep leagues and you need a handcuff to O.J. Howard, because if anything happens to O.J. Howard, then Cameron Brate will have opportunity to take over and get some receptions for them. So that's my take on them. Just do not draft this defense, because they lost some players from last year and they're playing all these offenses. Just don't even do it. And then their kicker. This is just another tragic situation where, so they drafted another kicker. His name is Matt Gay, and then he's competing with Cairo Santos. But I mean, this is just another team that, like, their kickers just do not seem to produce for them at all. And just there's so many other kickers you could take. Like, why would you draft a Tampa Bay kicker? That's just not a good idea. Don't ever let anyone convince you that. But I don't know. I'm hoping the best for the guy, though. Maybe he'll actually be a good player for them. But anyway. So, yeah, that's the NFC South. One more division left. We got the NFC West. And then after that, I'll start going into some draft strategies and do some more mock drafts. And, yeah, we'll see where it goes. So let me know what you think. And feel free to comment. Or if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So, all right. Talk to you later. Bye.